You feel it before you ever fully understand it. The shift in someone's tone, the tightening in their smile, the way their presence starts to drain you instead of strengthen you. You sense it deep in your spirit long before your mind can name it, and that's why today we step into a truth that too many people learn too late. Narcissistic behavior is not random, not accidental, not a mystery written in shadows. It's built layer by layer through three powerful ingredients that shape the way a narcissist thinks, feels, and interacts with the world. Once you understand these ingredients, everything suddenly becomes clear: why they behave the way they do, why you felt what you felt, and why your healing requires not just distance from them, but knowledge within you. There is a moment when you stop blaming yourself for the chaos someone else brought into your life. And that moment comes when you begin to understand the psychology behind the patterns. You remember the times you questioned your own worth, the times you sat awake at night replaying conversations, trying to understand where you went wrong, wondering why your kindness was met with coldness, why your loyalty was met with manipulation, why your love was stretched and squeezed until it became exhaustion disguised as patience. But none of those experiences were random. They were the result of a personality powered by very specific forces. And once you pull back the curtain, you no longer see their behavior as personal. You see it as predictable. The first keynote reveals a truth that often becomes clear only after you've already been pulled into the emotional gravity of a narcissist. Their dependence on admiration is not casual, not optional, and not something they can simply turn off. It is their emotional oxygen, the very fuel that powers their identity, their confidence, and their sense of control. To understand this is to understand the foundation of their behavior. A narcissist cannot function without admiration because admiration is the mirror they use to see themselves. Without it, they feel invisible, unimportant, and internally threatened. This need shapes their interactions, their choices, and even the people they allow into their lives. When a narcissist first enters your world, this need often disguises itself as charisma. They shower you with attention, compliments, energy, and excitement, not because they want to genuinely connect with you, but because they see you as a potential source of admiration. You feel chosen, you feel valued, you feel special. But what you don't realize in those early moments is that you have been selected not for who you are, but for what you can supply. You become a reflection surface, someone they can rely on for praise, validation, and emotional boosting. This is why the beginning of these relationships feels intoxicating. They are gathering admiration, and they are giving just enough to secure it. As time passes, the pattern begins to reveal itself. Conversations subtly shift from mutual exchange to one-sided performance. Every moment becomes an opportunity for them to shine, to impress, to dominate the emotional landscape. If you celebrate something in your life, they redirect the spotlight to themselves. If you succeed, they find a way to overshadow it. If you share your dreams, they dismiss them or convert them into a comparison. Slowly, you begin adjusting yourself, speaking less about your victories, reducing your needs, softening your presence, because you subconsciously learn that anything that takes attention away from them creates tension. You shrink so they can feel big, not because you're weak, but because their reactions condition you to maintain the peace. Their desperation for admiration also makes them highly sensitive to any form of perceived criticism or lack of attention. A simple disagreement feels like betrayal to them. A neutral tone feels like disrespect. A boundary feels like rejection. Anything that threatens their supply triggers defensiveness, blame, shifting, silent treatment, or sudden coldness. You start walking on emotional eggshells, trying to keep them satisfied so they don't erupt or withdraw. You bend yourself into shapes you never meant to take, not realizing that their reactions have nothing to do with you personally. They are reacting to the fear of losing control over their source of admiration. This constant craving for validation also shapes the way they treat relationships as disposable. If one source starts to run low, they begin seeking admiration elsewhere. They look for new people to charm, new environments to dominate, new attention to collect. This is why so many victims feel blindsided when a narcissist shifts suddenly or discards the connection. The relationship was never about emotional bond, it was about emotional supply. And once they sense the supply weakening or becoming harder to maintain, they either escalate their demands or replace the source entirely. This cycle is not about love, it is about need. What makes this ingredient especially damaging is the way it distorts your self-worth. You begin believing that their changing behavior reflects your inadequacy rather than their insatiability. You think you didn't give enough, love enough, understand enough. But the truth is, no amount of admiration is ever enough for someone whose identity depends on it. Their emptiness creates a bottomless pit that cannot be filled, no matter how deeply or consistently you pour into it. And that is not your fault. It is a structural part of their personality, one that you did not create and cannot cure. Understanding this frees you from the emotional trap. You stop taking their reactions personally. You stop measuring your worth based on their approval. You stop exhausting yourself trying to maintain a spotlight that was never meant to be shared. Instead, you reclaim your own identity, recognizing that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, connection, and support, not on one person feeding the ego of another. Once you see that their need for admiration is a survival system, not a reflection of your value, you begin to detach emotionally, and in that detachment, you find your power again. The second keynote exposes one of the most painful and confusing realities of dealing with a narcissist: their lack of empathy. This absence is not always obvious at first. In the beginning, they can mimic understanding, echo your emotions, or pretend to care, but it is imitation, not genuine connection. As time passes, the truth slowly appears. Your feelings don't register with them the way feelings normally do with emotionally healthy people. Your hurt doesn't soften them. Your disappointment doesn't move them. Your needs don't inspire them, and your vulnerability doesn't open their heart. Instead, your emotions are processed through one question: how does this affect me? This single question sits at the core of their emotional world. When someone lacks empathy, they cannot step into your perspective. They cannot feel the weight of your sadness or the warmth of your joy. They cannot understand how their actions break you or how their silence wounds you. And because they cannot feel the impact, they do not adjust their behavior. This is why narcissists repeat the same hurtful actions over and over, regardless of how many times you cry, confront, explain, or plead. You think you're having a moment of connection, a moment where your pain will finally lead to change, but for them, you're simply expressing noise that interferes with their self-image or their comfort. This lack of empathy becomes the root of their most damaging behaviors. It fuels their manipulation because they don't feel guilt when they twist your words or distort the truth. It fuels their lying because your trust is not something they value emotionally. It's simply something they use. It fuels their selfishness because they never center your needs unless those needs benefit them in return. And it fuels their cruelty because your pain is seen as weakness or inconvenience rather than a call for compassion. Imagine standing in front of someone emotionally trembling, trying to express how deeply their actions hurt you. You wait for understanding, expecting them to soften, apologize, or at least acknowledge how you feel. But instead, they dismiss your emotions, mock your reaction, flip the blame onto you, or completely detach as if nothing significant is happening. You walk away confused, wondering how someone can witness your emotional breaking point and remain untouched. But that confusion only exists because you're trying to understand them through your emotional lens, not theirs. They do not process feelings with the same depth. Where you feel connection, they feel obligation. Where you feel guilt, they feel annoyance. Where you feel responsibility, they feel disruption. This is why your emotional expressions often become ammunition for them. When you cry, instead of comforting you, they may accuse you of being dramatic. When you express hurt, they say you're too sensitive. When you explain your boundaries, they say you're selfish or disrespectful. They twist your emotions into flaws because empathy would allow them to understand you, but lacking empathy allows them to use your emotions against you. And in that reversal, you start doubting your own emotional reality. Over time, you learn to suppress your feelings to avoid their reactions. You hide your disappointments, silence your concerns, and stop expressing your needs because every attempt leaves you feeling worse instead of better. But this emotional suppression is where you lose yourself without realizing it. You become a quieter, smaller version of yourself, not because you want to, but because you've been trained to believe that your emotions only create conflict. This is the psychological damage caused by their lack of empathy. It disconnects you from your own emotional truth. But here's the most important part. Their lack of empathy is not a reflection of your worth or the quality of your heart. It has nothing to do with your value as a human being. Their inability to care deeply does not mean you are undeserving of care. Their emotional emptiness does not mean you are unlovable. Their cold responses do not mean your feelings are too much. Their indifference is built into their personality structure, not into your identity. Understanding this allows you to detach from the cycle of trying to earn empathy from someone who cannot give what they do not have. You stop hoping that the next conversation, the next apology, the next emotional breakdown will finally get through to them. You stop believing that if you just explain yourself better, they will finally understand. You stop taking their reactions as reflections of you and start seeing them as reflections of their limitations. This awareness frees you. It allows you to grieve what you never received. It allows you to stop blaming yourself for expecting basic emotional connection. It allows you to create boundaries not out of anger, but out of clarity. And most importantly, It allows you to redirect your emotional energy toward people who can actually meet you with presence, understanding, and genuine care. Their lack of empathy shaped their behavior, but your newfound clarity shapes your freedom. The third keynote opens the door to the truth that sits beneath every layer of narcissistic behavior, the deep, hidden insecurity that they work endlessly to cover, deny, and disguise. At first glance, a narcissist may appear confident, bold, superior, even untouchable. They speak with certainty, carry themselves with intensity, and present an image of someone who knows exactly who they are. But that image is not their identity. It is a shield, a mask, a carefully constructed defense system designed to hide the fragile, unstable sense of self that sits trembling underneath. To understand this insecurity is to understand why they behave the way they do, why they react so violently to minor challenges, and why they cling to control with such desperation. Their insecurity isn't just a trait, it is the engine that drives their entire personality. A narcissist spends their life avoiding one thing at all costs: being exposed. Under their arrogance lies a fear of inadequacy. Under their superiority lies a fear of being ordinary. Under their controlling behavior lies a fear of losing power. And under their cruelty lies a fear of being unmasked. These fears control them more than they control you. This is what makes them so reactive. This is why a simple boundary feels like rejection to them. This is why honest feedback feels like a direct attack. This is why disagreement triggers rage or coldness. Their ego is a thin shell, and even the slightest pressure threatens to crack it. When you first meet them, you only see the armor, the confidence, the bravado, the charm. They appear larger than life. Someone who has everything under control. But what you don't see is how exhausting it is for them to maintain that image. Every moment is a performance. Every interaction is a calculation. Every relationship is a balancing act between needing admiration and fearing exposure. This is why they crumble so quickly when the illusion weakens. They behave as if they are powerful, but their emotional stability is built on sand. This insecurity also explains their constant need to compare themselves to others. They don't just want to be good, they want to be better. They don't just want to be recognized, they want to be superior. Your success feels like their failure. Your growth feels like a threat. Your confidence feels like competition. They cannot celebrate your victories because your victories remind them of the emptiness they are hiding. So they downplay your achievements, criticize your capabilities, or shift the focus back to themselves. They do this not because your success diminishes them, but because their insecurity convinces them that any moment where they are not the center puts their mask at risk. This deep insecurity also explains why they cannot tolerate vulnerability, both yours and their own. Your vulnerability makes them uncomfortable because they don't know how to handle emotions authentically. Their vulnerability terrifies them because it exposes the truth they are running from. This is why, when they are confronted with their flaws, they refuse to take accountability. Admitting fault feels like emotional death to them. Apologizing feels like surrender. Understanding your viewpoint feels like losing control. To protect themselves, they blame you, deny reality, rewrite events, and project their weaknesses onto you. In their mind, it is safer to distort the truth than to face the insecurity beneath it. Their fragile self-image is also the reason they are so unpredictable. When their ego feels secure, when you're praising them, admiring them, or making them feel superior, they appear charming, attentive, and confident. But when their ego feels threatened, when you question them, outshine them, or simply don't react the way they expect, their entire personality shifts. Suddenly, the charm disappears, the warmth fades, the arrogance grows, the rage surfaces, or the coldness becomes unbearable. Their emotional swings are not random, they are reactions to the instability within them. The tragedy is that their insecurity makes them believe that controlling others will bring them safety. They think dominance equals stability. But in reality, the more control they try to gain, the more unstable they become. Their relationships fail because they suffocate them. Their friendships crumble because they can't maintain genuine connection. Their careers become chaotic because they can't handle criticism. Everywhere they go, their insecurity follows, creating the same patterns again and again. But the part that matters most for you is this: their insecurity is not your responsibility. It is not your job to soothe it, fix it, or protect it. Many people stay in relationships with narcissists because they feel sympathy for the brokenness underneath. They think that if they love harder, stay longer, or sacrifice more, the narcissist will finally feel secure enough to change. But insecurity that deep cannot be healed by someone else's love. It cannot be stabilized through sacrifice. It cannot be repaired through patience. It is the narcissist's own internal battle, one they refuse to fight because facing it means facing the truth they fear. Understanding this frees you from the illusion that you could have done something differently. It frees you from the belief that their behavior was your fault. It frees you from thinking you weren't enough. Their insecurity shaped their actions, but it never reflected your worth. And once you see the fragility behind their facade, you stop feeling intimidated and start feeling liberated. You realize they were never the giant you thought they were, just someone hiding behind armor too heavy for them to carry. The fourth keynote brings you into a place of clarity that becomes the turning point for anyone who has ever dealt with a narcissist. It's the moment when everything that once felt personal, confusing, and emotionally heavy suddenly becomes understandable. When you recognize that narcissistic behavior is predictable, not emotional chaos, not emotional mystery, not a reflection of your worth, you stop blaming yourself for the pain you experienced. You stop replaying the hurt, trying to figure out why things happened the way they did. You begin to realize that their patterns were not about you at all. They were about the structure of their personality, the ingredients that shaped their entire identity. This understanding is what frees you from carrying emotional responsibility that was never yours to begin with. When you don't understand narcissistic behavior, you take everything to heart. Every silent treatment feels like punishment you somehow earned. Every outburst feels like evidence that you failed them. Every cold response feels like your emotions don't matter. Every manipulation feels like confusion you should have seen coming. Every sudden shift from love to indifference, from attention to abandonment, feels like a judgment on your worth. You internalize their reactions because you believe there must be something wrong with you to provoke such extremes. But understanding the ingredients behind their behavior changes your entire perspective. You begin to see that these reactions were not tailored to you. They were the same patterns they would project onto anyone who entered their life. Once you understand the first ingredient, admiration addiction, you stop blaming yourself for failing to satisfy them. You realize no amount of love or effort could have filled their emotional void because their need for admiration is endless. You stop believing that you weren't enough because you finally see that they are incapable of feeling enough, regardless of how much someone gives them. You stop thinking that their disappointment reflects your shortcomings and start recognizing that it reflects their dependence on external validation. This shift alone removes a weight from your heart that you've carried for far too long. Then you understand the second ingredient, the lack of empathy, and suddenly everything that felt cruel or cold begins to make sense. You realize that their inability to support you emotionally was not a reflection of your worthiness, but a reflection of their incapacity. Their dismissiveness, their insensitivity, their inability to understand your feelings were not because you were too emotional or too sensitive, but because they were emotionally underdeveloped. You stop seeing their lack of comfort as rejection and start seeing it as limitation. This understanding frees you from the emotional confusion they created inside you. It allows you to see the truth. You were asking for basic emotional connection from someone who was never capable of giving it. And then once you understand the third ingredient, their deep insecurity, you stop feeling intimidated by their outbursts or controlled by their reactions. You realize their anger wasn't strength. Their criticism wasn't truth. Their superiority wasn't real. Their attempts to belittle you were not reflections of your weakness, but attempts to hide their own. Their need to dominate conversation, decisions, and dynamics wasn't authority. It was fear of being seen, fear of being challenged, fear of losing control. When you see the insecurity beneath their behavior, you stop believing the things they said about you. You stop absorbing their insults as facts. You stop shrinking yourself to protect their ego because now you know the truth. Everything they projected onto you was simply a reflection of themselves. This understanding becomes the moment you step out of the emotional fog. You begin to separate your identity from their behavior. You begin to see patterns instead of taking blame. You begin to see cycles instead of seeing personal attacks. And this shift is powerful because once you see the predictability of their behavior, you can no longer be controlled by it. It doesn't affect you the same way. It doesn't confuse you the same way. It doesn't break you the same way. You begin to realize that narcissistic behavior follows the same script, the same loop, the same emotional structure, no matter who they interact with. You were not singled out for punishment, nor chosen for harm. You were simply placed into the role their personality demanded. And when you step out of that role with awareness, you take back your power. You stop participating in the emotional games they play. You stop reacting to their provocations. You stop trying to fix what you never broke. Understanding the three ingredients helps you see that their behavior came from their psychology, not from your worth. And once you see that, healing becomes possible. You stop searching for closure in their hands. You stop hoping they will someday understand your pain. You stop waiting for apologies that will never come. Instead, you give yourself the closure. You give yourself the understanding. You give yourself the peace that they never could. And in that clarity, you finally realize that the chaos you experience wasn't personal. The pain wasn't personal. The manipulation wasn't personal. It was predictable, it was structural, and it was never your fault. Understanding this is what sets you free. The fifth keynote marks the beginning of your healing. The moment when you stop trying to win validation from someone who was never capable of giving it in the first place. This keynote reminds you that reclaiming your self-worth, setting boundaries, and choosing distance are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of self-rest. For so long, you may have lived inside a cycle where you were constantly giving, adjusting, explaining, forgiving, and hoping that maybe this time they would understand your heart. Maybe this time they would recognize your efforts. Maybe this time the relationship would feel different. But every attempt to earn their approval only pulled you deeper into emotional exhaustion. It's only when you understand the nature of narcissistic behavior that you can finally see the truth. Healing doesn't start with them changing. Healing starts with you changing what you give them access to. One of the most powerful parts of this keynote is recognizing that your self-worth does not depend on the reactions, moods, or approval of a narcissist. Narcissists are masters at conditioning people to believe that love must be earned, that worth is measured by how much you sacrifice, that peace requires silence, and that your emotional needs are burdens. Over time, you begin to shrink yourself just to keep the relationship functioning. You silence your truth to avoid conflict. You bend your boundaries to avoid punishment. You abandon your needs because there's always become the center. But when you start reclaiming your self-worth, you reverse this pattern. You begin to understand that your needs matter just as much as anyone else's. You begin to remember that you deserve support, respect, and reciprocity. And this realization is what allows you to step back from the emotional grip they once had over you. Setting boundaries becomes one of the most important steps in taking your life back. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They do not shut people out, they protect your emotional space. But narcissists despise boundaries because boundaries limit their control. When you say no, they interpret it as a challenge. When you require respect, they interpret it as rebellion. When you express your standards, they interpret it as disrespect. Their reactions often make you doubt whether setting boundaries is the right thing to do. But when you understand that boundaries protect your mental and emotional well-being, you stop feeling guilty for creating them. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop justifying your decisions. Instead, you begin to hold firm, not from anger, but from clarity. Choosing distance becomes another powerful turning point. Distance doesn't always mean cutting someone out completely. It means stepping back far enough to see them clearly. Emotional distance allows you to observe their patterns without being consumed by them. Mental distance allows you to detach from their manipulation. Physical distance gives you the breathing room to think, reflect, and recover. The closer you are to a narcissist, the more distorted your perception becomes. But the moment you create distance, the fog begins to lift. You begin to see the truth without their influence shaping your thoughts. You begin to remember who you were before their presence slowly reshaped you. You begin to reconnect with your own voice, the one that was silenced for far too long. Reclaiming your self-worth is not an overnight transformation. It's a gradual return to yourself. It starts with small steps, recognizing your triggers, acknowledging your emotions without judgment, and reaffirming that your boundaries are valid. You give yourself permission to feel angry, sad, confused, or hurt, not because these emotions define you, but because they free you. Healing doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. Honesty about what happened. Honesty about what you tolerated. Honesty about what you deserve going forward. The moment you stop attempting to earn validation from a narcissist is the moment the dynamic begins to collapse. They lose their emotional power when you no longer respond to their guilt-tripping, their accusations, or their attempts to bait you into conflict. They lose their influence when you stop reacting. They lose their control when you stop explaining yourself. The more you stand in your truth, the less space they have to dominate your emotional world. This keynote also reminds you that healing is not just about leaving something behind. It's about stepping into something better. It's about discovering relationships where love is mutual, support is natural, and connection is genuine. It's about surrounding yourself with people who see your value, not just your usefulness. It's about building a life where your peace is not constantly negotiated or threatened. The moment you reclaim your self-worth, everything begins to shift. You start making decisions based on what nourishes you, not what drains you. You choose relationships that feel safe, not ones that keep you guessing. You rediscover your voice, your strength, your confidence, and most importantly, you realize that you never needed the narcissist's validation to be whole. You simply needed the space to return to yourself. Awareness empowers you to avoid repeating the cycle, recognize red flags early, and choose relationships built on respect and mutual growth. When you finally understand the architecture of narcissistic behavior, something powerful happens within you. Your vision clears. You stop moving through your relationships blindly, hoping things will magically become better. Instead, you begin to see the underlying patterns that once confused you. You begin to understand why certain conversations always left you feeling drained, why certain people always made you question yourself, and why your empathy kept being used as fuel for someone else's ego. This awareness is not just information, it is transformation. It allows you to break cycles that generations before you may have unknowingly repeated, cycles of emotional chaos, cycles of giving too much and receiving too little, cycles of mistaking intensity for love, cycles of believing manipulation is normal. Awareness is the beginning of freedom, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. As this awareness grows, your mind starts revisiting past interactions with a new understanding. You begin to realize that what you thought was love was often control disguised as concern. What you believed was passion was often emotional instability. What you interpreted as sincerity was often strategic mirroring. This clarity is not meant to make you bitter. It is meant to make you wiser. Because once you can identify the red flags early, you save yourself years of emotional damage. You no longer excuse hot and cold behavior as a personality quirk. You no longer justify emotional neglect as someone being busy. You no longer allow gaslighting to twist your reality into self-blame. Instead, you start trusting your instincts again. You start honoring your discomfort. You start recognizing that your intuition was never wrong. You were just conditioned to ignore it. Awareness reconnects you with your inner compass, the one that was always there but drowned out by emotional chaos. This awareness also teaches you that relationships should add to your life, not strip pieces of you away. You stop romanticizing self-sacrifice. You stop mistaking survival for strength. You understand that reciprocity isn't a luxury. It is a foundation. Respect isn't negotiable. It is mandatory. Love should never require losing yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And once that realization becomes part of you, you begin to rise differently. You speak differently. You choose differently. Because now you are choosing from wisdom, not wounds. And when you choose from wisdom, you attract people who respect your boundaries instead of resenting them. You gravitate toward those who see your worth instead of exploiting it. You become a mirror that reflects strength rather than vulnerability disguised as desperation. As you continue walking in this awareness, you stop fearing loneliness because you understand that loneliness with peace is better than togetherness with toxicity. You stop chasing closure from people who benefit from keeping you confused. You stop giving explanations to those who never intended to understand you. You start directing your energy toward growth rather than repair. This shift is powerful because before awareness, you were operating in survival mode. You tolerated behaviors you should have walked away from. You accepted crumbs because you didn't know what a full table looked like. Awareness finally shows you the table you deserve. It shows you what healthy communication feels like, what emotional safety looks like, what mutual effort creates. And once you experience that even within yourself, you will never settle for emotional chaos again. This awareness also breaks generational chains. Many people who end up in narcissistic cycles grew up in environments where dysfunction felt familiar, chaos felt like home, unpredictability felt normal, being needed felt like being loved. But awareness interrupts this programming. It teaches you that love is not chaos, love is not fear, love is not inconsistency, love is not punishment disguised as protection. And by learning this, you begin rewriting your internal definitions. You start teaching yourself what love actually is. You start building a new emotional template, one rooted in stability, trust, and mutual respect. This new template becomes your filter, and without effort, you begin choosing healthier people, healthier connections, healthier environments. It happens naturally because your awareness has rewired your emotional expectations. And ultimately, this awareness empowers you to choose yourself, something you may have never been encouraged to do. You no longer define your worth through someone else's validation. You no longer measure your value by how much you can endure. You understand that peace is not earned through suffering. You begin protecting your heart, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You let go of the people who drain you. You let go of the situations that confine you. You let go of the narratives that belittle you. And in releasing these things, you make space for relationships built on mutual growth, connections where both people rise, not where one person thrives at the expense of the other. Awareness is not just protection, it is evolution. It turns pain into insight, confusion into clarity, and heartbreak into a higher standard. Once your standards change, your entire life changes because you finally understand that you deserve relationships that lift you, not ones that break you.